What has happened to Italian football? It used to be the go-to place for the star players in the world to go to, and it was so dominant in the 90s and the 2000s, yet recently it just seems to be in a downward spiral. And I know Inter Milan made the Champions League final last year, but let's just dive into why Italian football has declined so much. So, just some quick context for this video. The Serie A have recently agreed a new broadcast deal for the next 5 years, and this will be with DAZN and Sky, and it's roughly about 4.5 billion euros. And this is kind of why I'm making this video, because compared to the Premier League rights, this is so much less. I mean, the Premier League, I think, is about 5.4 billion pounds over the next 5 years. So there's like a few billion in between. And it's even the Napoli current president has said this is the death of Italian football, because the price of football has just gone down so much. I think the Serie A were actually after about 7.2 billion euros. So it's a completely massive difference from what they were after. And I think you just have to compare this to the 1990s, when Channel 4 in England had the rights for the Serie A, because it was mainly because the star player Paul Gascoigne used to play for Newcastle, Spurs, Rangers, England international. He moved to Lazio, and this was, the English way of trying to promote him and get all his, TV rights across in the UK. And it was also because the Premier League had just started in 1992, and this was a premium service, you had to pay for it, whereas the Italian game was now on Freeview, which I think all of this just gave the Serie A a head start, because not only did you have Diego Maradona at Napoli in the 80s, but also the English European ban, because of like the hooliganism with Liverpool and other clubs. They got banned from Europe, so for 5 years, English teams weren't allowed to play in European competition, whereas that meant all the good players were going to places like Italy, and you had players like Van Basten, Baggio, Ruud Gullit, all these players who were just world class at the time, playing for the AC Milans, the Inter Milans, Juventus, whoever. And this just carried on to create the boom that was just Italian football at the time, and that carried on into the 2000s. But it was also because Italia 90 or so, that was just such a boom that just promoted the Italian game so much more. But also Italia 90 could be also seen as a very early but problem with Italian football, because the funding was partly due from the Italian Olympic Committee, which they needed running tracks in these stadiums, which if you have seen Italian football nowadays, if you watch a Napoli game, a Roma game, the fans are so good, but you don't see them. You just see a running track. And as a TV fan, because, I don't live in Italy, most of the people, obviously in UK, aren't really going to visit these grounds. You need to see the crowd. You need to feel, immersed in the atmosphere. Whereas you just watch it and it looks terrible, let's face it. It's no disrespect for the Italians. I know that the crowds are fantastic, but the only real good one is the Allianz in Juventus, because that's been built recently. But with the Italia 90, that has kind of put a bit of a damper on these stadiums, and also I think it's put a lot of debt into these clubs, because I believe it was about 84% over budget. So they obviously hadn't planned for all these renovations for the tournament. And I know Italian clubs are very aware of this. It's even Roma have been trying to, get their new stadium going for about 10 years now, because they're desperate to move out of our Stadium Olimpico, and they're trying to make, a brand new one, because if you think about it, Rome is one of the most desirable places in the world, if not maybe the first one to visit and just, immerse yourself in the culture. And if they have a average stadium, it's a big stadium, but it's not the prettiest in the world, they should be able to promote the best stadium in the world in Rome. And I think they've compared it to, in the time that Roma have been trying to do it, I think London have had 3 new stadiums alone, like the Olympic Stadium, the Tottenham Stadium, sorry. And I think they're very aware of the problem, but they just can't seem to fix it at the moment. And if we're still focusing on just the stadiums alone and the fans attending the games, the attendances aren't great in the Italian league. I looked about, and it was about 30,000 average attendance throughout the league, throughout all 20 teams. And if you compare that to the Premier League, they have about 38,000, but that is also including Kenilworth Road for Luton and the Vitality Stadium for Bournemouth, which is under 13,000, both of them. It's pretty incredible that the Serie A is still down there. And if you're looking at the Premier League, has no teams under 90% full this season. The Spanish League only has 4 teams below 80%, and the Bundesliga only 3 teams under 90%. Whereas the Serie A, they have 10 teams under 80% full, and 2 teams are even under 60% full, which for a top flight Italian team, there is no reason why they shouldn't be filling at least 80 to 90% of their stadium. And I suppose this just goes into the wider issue. But I suppose the quality of the league might not be attracting these fans to, attend the games really. And if we're comparing it to, let's say, 2 decades ago in the 2000s with, the 2006 winning World Cup team, you had the prime AC Milan teams with the Seedorfs, the Kakas, the Gattusos, the Nestas, the Mardinis, the Cafus, all these lot. You know, that Juventus team with the prime Nedved, prime Buffon, prime Cannavaro. You had, 2 Ballon d'Or winners in that side. And I think you compare it to nowadays, there seems to be a less Italian talent in these teams because, to go back to the Juventus team in 2005, they had 4 out of their 5 players with the most appearances were Italian. Whereas you compare it to this Napoli team, only 1 out of the top 10 appearances were Italian, which I suppose is it the influx of foreign talent because obviously that is just becoming so much more now. You can come even in the English league, there are so many more foreign players, and I think it helps the game. But people have always questioned, does it hinder the national talent coming through? And that's up for debate. In my opinion, I think if you're good enough, you're good enough. If your development's not going to get, hindered by the Norwegian like coming through the ranks. But people might argue otherwise, and it could be happening in the Italian league because really, I know they won Euro 2020, and that was a fantastic win. I thought Mancini did great with that Italian team, but they didn't have any superstars. It was just a well-organised team. And who's the best Italian prospect recently? Chiesa? Maybe I really like him, but if you're comparing him to Totti, Buffon, Cannavaro, Del Piero, in the 90s, Baggio, he's worlds apart, isn't he? And this could be potentially why the Italian game is suffering because they might not be bringing through great players at the moment, and every country has that. I mean, look at the Brazilians recently; they haven't brought through fantastic players. Obviously, they've got Neymar, brilliant players like that, but compared to the crop in the 90s and 2000s, it's nowhere near it. But also, the no real European success in the last 2 decades really could be hindering the Italian league, and this obviously links into maybe not the Italian players coming through the ranks as much, but if you compare it to the 2000s, in the 2000s, 5 Italian teams reached the final of the Champions League. And then since then, so nearly 14 years, only 3 have. And 1 was last year, and then 2 of them Juventus. But we all remember the Jose Mourinho Inter Milan treble winning side, the AC Milan side who played Liverpool twice, and then again in the early 2000s. There's just so many, especially also the Juventus side. And we all have to remember the Champions League is the biggest stage, definitely in European football, and probably second to the World Cup. If your teams aren't there to represent your country, no one bats an eye really. And if you don't have the players showcasing yourself, then it's just not really going to help market your league really. Because if we look at last season, I thought Napoli were brilliant. I think they did a really good job of kind of reminding people that the Serie A was a good league because again the Georgian fella can't pronounce his name, and then Osimhen, they just took the Champions League by storm, and I think it does a really good job of promoting the Serie A. But if they don't have many teams like that, then it's not going to be able to promote the Serie A. But I personally think one of, if not the main reasons that the Serie A and Italian football has taken somewhat of a backseat is just the introduction of or just the progression of other leagues. I mean, the Premier League is just it's in a world of its own at the moment. It is just unstoppable machine, and it is the most watched, the best league in the world completely. The Spanish league seems to be on a bit of a comeback at the moment, but we all know in the 2010s it just dominated, didn't it? Messi, Ronaldo, Xavi, Iniesta, there's the Barca, Real Madrid teams, plus that little Atletico Madrid little run in the middle. It just creates such a great product, really. And then obviously you've got the Bundesliga, who I'd argue are probably the 3rd best league in the world because obviously you've got Bayern Munich and Borussia Dortmund. But Bayern Munich have just been so dominant, haven't they, over the last, well, forever really, but especially recently. Won 2 Champions Leagues in the last 11 years. And I think this is just all propelled over the Italian league. So I think there's a lot of reasons, but I look at the Italian league, it's self-inflicted a bit because you had Cristiano Ronaldo in 2018. Yes, he wasn't banging his prime, but I think he was, 32? So he was still at pretty much the top of his game. They did not market that anywhere near it. They did not capitalise on that at all. Juventus unfortunately didn't win anything in Europe at the time, which I think would have propelled the league even more. But it just seemed to come and go, really. It seemed to... Ronaldo went to Juventus 2018, and then he went to Manchester United, and it seemed like Juventus just wanted to wash their hands of him, which just seemed unfortunate because even though if he wasn't the best, player for Juventus that they wanted him to be, he's a global brand, Ronaldo, in itself, and I just don't think they market him well enough, really. But let me know what you think. I'll be honest, I'm not a massive fan of Italian football, especially on the TV. I'll always tune into it if it's playing midweek in the Champions League. And don't get me wrong, I love going to Italy, but I'd love to go to the Roma Stadium. I'd love to go to San Siro, the Allianz in Turin. There's so many places I'd love to visit. But I think the TV product is just so far behind the Premier League and also the La Liga, because if you look at the graphics nowadays with La Liga, I think it's even further ahead than the Premier League, but the Premier League's just got that established product and it's got the finance basically. And I think unfortunately Italian football is just dropping behind, and with this new TV deal, it might be, might see a bit of an exodus of players, because if the wages aren't as high as, Premier League, Bundesliga, Spanish League, even the French League, then people are just going to leave really, and it's just going to go downhill. I think there will be another crop of Italian players coming through. There always is. I know they did really well in Euro 2020, but obviously didn't qualify for the last World Cup. So I suppose it's a tough one with the national team at the moment. Let me know if you're Italian. Tell me what I don't know about it. But yeah, thanks for watching. Like I say, if you're Italian, if you're a big fan of the Italian league, if you could comment on the video and tell me, is it a good product? What needs changing? Blah, blah, blah. And yeah, thanks for watching. If you're new here, if you could subscribe, that'd be great. And see you next time.